Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, committed suicide in the year 30 BC. With her death, an entire world collapsed. Egypt and its shining capital, Alexandria, fell into the hands of the Roman Empire. Centuries before, Alexander the Great dreamed of this city, a city of splendor and universal knowledge. Among its treasures, the Great Library and the famous lighthouse. It was to be the shining jewel of a mighty empire that stretched from Greece to India. Thanks to recent archaeological salvage operations below ground and beneath the waves, the city that was home to Cleopatra is finally being brought to light. Today, archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur and historian Harry Tsalas are opening exciting new chapters in Alexandria's history as they attempt to reconstitute the antique city. Over 2,000 years after the death of Cleopatra, the ancient world continues to fire man's imagination. A young Greek prince, soon to be known as Alexander the Great, was setting off to conquer the world. One of the cities he founded and designed on the coast of Egypt was destined to become the capital of the ancient world, Alexandria. It would provide a strategic military center to control the Eastern Mediterranean and become one of the most important trading centers known to man. It was to be a place of learning and culture, where science and the arts would come together, a magnet for the greatest minds of the time. Alexander designed the city and assigned one of his most trusted generals, Ptolemy, to supervise the construction. Alexander continued east to further his conquests. He never witnessed the completion of the city he had founded and named after himself, and for which he had so carefully drawn up sophisticated architectural plans. It was an unlikely place to create a harbor capital, wedged between a lake and a treacherous sea, with no drinkable water for miles around. But Alexander, inspired by the mythical story of the Odyssey, in which the island of Pharos is described as an ideal port, decided this was to be his chosen location. Harry Tsalas is a Greek historian, born and raised in Alexandria. He and his team of underwater archaeologists are exploring the seabed for new evidence of the ancient palaces and temples that once stood on Cape Lochias.
This is an ideal location to have a panoramic view on the eastern port of Alexandria. That was the most important of the two ports. Where we have that fortress stood the Pharos, over 100 meters high, one of the wonders of the ancient world. Then, if we continue, we had Cape Lochias. Cape Lochias, we only see a small jetty. It was much, much wider. Most of it is today in the sea between 7 and 12 meters depth. There were three important buildings on Cape Lochias. There was a palace. Then there was a temple, the temple of Isis Lochias, and the mausoleum of Cleopatra, which Cleopatra had prepared, as the pharaohs would do, as the great kings and queens would do, but she was never buried in that mausoleum.
After a careful study of ancient texts, the archaeologists exploring Alexandria know the approximate locations of the monuments. But after thousands of years, finding and identifying the archaeological treasures that sleep beneath the sea is a difficult task. It's a giant puzzle that will require years of patience. Today's Alexandria is a vast and sprawling metropolis with over 4 million inhabitants. It is the second largest city in Egypt, exploding under demographic pressure. To fulfill the needs of its ever-growing population, the crumbling buildings built in the 19th century are being rapidly replaced by high-rise apartment buildings. Over a decade ago, famous French archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur moved to Alexandria to try and recover and save vestiges from antiquity.
This city is undergoing dramatic change. Well, for example, all those one-story buildings over there, they're doomed to disappear because the price per square meter of land is so high. They'll be replaced by high-rise apartment buildings. Money is being invested in property. People want to be decently housed, and nothing has been built for decades. Building sites are multiplying, and unfortunately, us archaeologists can't always keep up. Everything is happening now, all at once. This is a crucial moment for Alexandrian archaeology and our knowledge of the ancient city.
Today's modern buildings need deep foundations. Modern construction techniques require developers dig to the bedrock 35 feet down. And this is where archaeologists like Jean-Yves Empereur and his team are making stunning discoveries. Here, the incredibly preserved mosaics from the baths of a Roman villa. There, a statue of Serapis, a god especially created by the Greek occupiers for the Egyptian population. The pressure on the archaeologists is enormous as they rush from site to site to find and preserve pieces of the city's important history. Here in the heart of Alexandria is a vast site known as Terra Santa, where Jean-Yves Empereur has the opportunity to conduct salvage archaeology in a more efficient way. The site belongs to the government, so the time frame is more flexible, and several ambitious digs are underway. Archaeologists in Alexandria form a small community, and although it is a highly competitive field, the scientists come together when something of interest is uncovered.
The feeling is Roman. During antiquity, in the natural bedrock, but it's full of late Roman material.
Digging to the bedrock level upon which the Greeks built their city is no easy task. The scientists must go through many layers, each one containing incarnations of previous Alexandrias, and each one revealing new information. Today's discovery is an intriguing passageway at the bottom of a well. It seems that it heads towards the road, which is where the Canopic Way of antiquity, the main road of Alexandria, used to be. Jean-Yves Empereur shows Harry Tsalas a recent satellite photo of Alexandria. Harry is very moved to see the city where he grew up so clearly laid out. It is similar to the view bomber pilots had during World War II as they flew over the city, when the screaming of sirens would force young Harry and his family to rush to the underground air raid shelters.
I lived in the shelters at night. Yes.
Yes? And some of them were ancient cisterns.
I did not know at the time.
But where exactly?
Atarid area. The problem is that afterwards, most have been sealed again without any
indication
records.
Yes.
It turns out that the shelters were originally underground water reservoirs, constructed in ancient times to provide the city with a supply of fresh water. They remained operational until the 19th century. Then they were used again as air raid shelters during World War II. Isabelle Harry works with Jean-Yves Empereur at the Center for Alexandrian Studies, and for some time now, she has been researching the cisterns of Alexandria. Most of the important reservoirs found in the city have been her discoveries. It's a lengthy process, searching through wartime newspaper archives, but she is finally able to track down the cistern that Harry Tsalas remembered. On a side street in downtown Alexandria, Isabel finds the entrance. It's a manhole under a table at a local tea house. Customers move good-naturedly. They're used to the strange behavior of archaeologists. Jean-Yves Empereur has noticed that most of the tops of the columns, known as capitals, are Corinthian. The strange thing is that a few of the capitals have been mounted upside down. Why is this? Yet another mystery to be solved.
There are Corinthian capitals. What's strange is
there are several on top of each other.
that capital is used upside down as a base, and at the top of the column there is a base being used upside down.
The city of Alexandria has always had a problem with its freshwater supply. A canal was built to bring water from the Nile to the outskirts of Alexandria in times of flood, and the hydraulic system was designed to allow the maximum development of the city. In Roman times, the city was home to over 500,000 people, all needing water for their daily lives. The fascination that the water reservoirs exert on the archaeologists goes way beyond their hydraulic importance. Each reservoir is in fact built using stones, columns, and various architectural elements from other antique buildings. It was a case of systematic recycling, and this allows Jean-Yves Empereur's team to catalog the elements from ancient monuments that were disassembled and reused in the construction of the water reservoir. One day they might be able to put all these pieces together and identify the original sources of these fragmented elements. This vast subterranean cathedral is El Nabi, the most beautiful of all the underground reservoirs. For centuries, a violent conflict has been raging between the land and the sea. The coastline of Alexandria has been battered by winds and water. Sometimes the land gives in and the sea moves forward, swallowing great chunks of the coast. At other times, man tries to impose his will over the unruly elements by building breakwaters and expanding the seafront. Huge blocks of concrete are man's answer to the endless pounding of the waves. But each one of these massive concrete blocks also risks destroying irreplaceable treasures from Alexandria's royal past, such as remnants of Cleopatra's palace, or of the wondrous lighthouse, or of the temple of Isis. Led by Jean-Yves Empereur, a crew of experienced divers is going to inspect the zone to see what the risks are, what damage might be done, and to try to salvage whatever they can. Many historical sources indicate that the lighthouse was built where the fort of Cat Bay now stands. On the seabed, not far from Cat Bay, lie dozens of granite blocks thrown tempestuously into the ocean by the angry hand of nature. It's a battlefield, with layer upon layer of ruins from ancient Alexandria. The extent of this underwater devastation is far beyond the archaeologists' expectations. Most of the pieces would seem to be from pharaonic Egypt and predate the foundation of the Hellenic city of Alexandria by 1,000 years. The sheer number of pieces astounds even these seasoned archaeologists and raises new questions about how Cleopatra's city once looked. Before they move a single piece of this puzzle, they painstakingly measure the site to identify and locate each and every stone block. It's a lengthy and difficult process, as the underwater currents are strong and there are thousands of pieces. As some scientists proceed with the mapping, Egyptologist Jean-Pierre Cottigiani encounters a sphinx. He deciphers the hieroglyphs as its decapitated head watches him from a few feet away. How did these sphinx end up in the Bay of Alexandria? What purpose did they serve? Appearing before the Egyptologist's eyes is an ancient inscription which reads, "The Lord of Heliopolis, a city of pharaonic Egypt."
The inscription on the right side is not very well preserved, but we have almost a complete the protocol of the king, and it's a good. I think it's a good surprise. It's a very good piece of art. It's funny because almost all the pieces are coming from Heliopolis. So, in fact, it's not a surprise because if you go to Heliopolis, there is almost no remains now.
More research is needed to understand how and why these elements that decorated a city hundreds of miles away ended up in the Bay of Alexandria. In their attempt to piece together the puzzle, the divers concentrate on groups of stone that seem to be related to each other. Encased in marine flora and covered with crustaceans, the elements and bases of 6 colossal statues appear in the dim light of the seabed. The broken stone bodies are incomplete, but they suggest the lost whole. And this royal head, polished by centuries of salt and sand, also representing the Egyptian goddess Isis, of whom Cleopatra was said to be the earthly incarnation. In all, about 10 pieces are retrieved, all in the style of the pharaohs. When they conquered Egypt 2,300 years ago, it was important for the newly arrived Greeks to take on the glamour of the divine pharaohs. The Greek empire they had created was barely tens of years old. The Greeks needed a way to make it clear that they were worthy successors in the legendary lineage of the sovereigns of Egypt. So they imposed their own features on statues of Egyptian divinities. This can only mean the existence, somewhere close by, of the remains of an edifice from the Greek period. Could this lead the archaeologists to the most important of all the Greek buildings in Alexandria, the Great Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world? And if so, will the scattered stones answer the riddle of the mysterious disappearance of the lighthouse itself? The statue stood at the entrance to the lighthouse, forming three royal couples portrayed as gods in the same tradition as that of the Egyptian pharaohs. This is further evidence that the lighthouse once stood at Cat Bay Fort. Now, the archaeologists' intention is to see if they can identify pieces of the lost lighthouse based on the alignment of the blocks. The divers seek any information that will help them reconstruct the shape of the ancient lighthouse itself. Their attempts to connect the various elements will reveal the next lead. A new piece of equipment which replaces the GPS makes for a quicker and more efficient survey technique. Using sound waves, the aquameter enables them to rapidly determine the relative position of each of the 3,000 underwater blocks. A general overview of the underwater terrain gradually emerges. A crucial stage is now complete. The scientists have identified the approximate period and precise position of each of the stones. The archaeologists can now proceed by elimination. Blocks dumped into the bay in the last 1,000 years to create breakwaters are disregarded, as are those from Heliopolis and other ancient Egyptian cities. Finding these remains in one area, aligned in this way, makes it likely that the destruction of the lighthouse in the 14th century was due to a series of natural disasters that entirely wiped out the building. Jean-Yves' research in various libraries yields the products of fertile imaginations. Over the years, the Great Lighthouse has attracted extravagant fantasies. Although it was the distinctive emblem of the city, there are few reliable descriptions. The most convincing image dates from the beginning of the 20th century. A German scholar, Hermann Tiersch, published in 1909 what became the accepted version. Lengthy studies allow the scientists to produce an accurate representation. A new image of the 400-foot lighthouse emerges, the 34-story-high wonder of the ancient world that guided the ships that came from all over the Mediterranean to do trade in Cleopatra's city of knowledge and power. Nobody knows what happened to Cleopatra's body after her death. Were she and her lover Mark Antony cremated in the Greek tradition, their ashes scattered in the bay, or was she secretly buried somewhere in the city? In modern Alexandria, construction has been stopped on a new bridge that is vital to decongest downtown traffic in the Gabari neighborhood. The construction workers have accidentally unearthed a large number of tombs that could be from the Hellenic period. Ahmed Abdel Fattah, director of Alexandria's Museums and Archaeological Studies, hopes Jean-Yves Empereur will conduct a salvage operation here during the short period in which construction can be interrupted.
This is the only room which is
completely cleared.
Yes.
This one, you see?
Yes.
But beneath, nothing was clear.
Yes,
because it was waiting your effort, you see?
For the first time, Jean-Yves Empereur is confronted with an ancient burial ground from the Hellenic period. Could this be part of Alexandria's legendary necropolis? Nothing can stop the archaeologists from plunging into the darkness to try and understand the world of the dead. Grave robbers have stolen everything they could, but some inscriptions still remain.
Anubatos,
Anubatos, Anubatos. 4 times. Someone called Anubas, the man of Anubis, the god of mummification, the Egyptian god who presided over all the mummifications. So it's not a dead man. It's not the name of a dead man, no. It's the name of someone who appropriated this wall. A funeral parlor, perhaps.
On the west side of Alexandria, outside the walls of the ancient city and beyond the canal, lay the city of the dead. The ancient Greek author Strabon describes it in detail. He called it the necropolis.
It's a word he coined specifically for this area, the city of the dead. His text is clear. Here begins the suburb of Alexandria, with numerous gardens, tombs, and reception areas looked after for the cult of the dead. So there are thousands of tombs, some of which were found in the 18th century. But they've all more or less disappeared. And this city of the dead was huge, 2 miles east to west, nearly a mile from north to south, which perfectly reflects the size of the city of the living.
Jean-Yves loses no time raising an army of workers for a full-scale excavation of the necropolis. In only a few short weeks, construction of the bridge will resume. He must uncover whatever he can before this unique site vanishes forever under reinforced concrete and rush hour traffic. Only a few feet below the surface, the first evidence of a human graveyard is brought to light. The bones of ancient Alexandrians slowly emerge into the modern world.
With all of these digs, we're confronted with the dead, with these hundreds of generations that separate us from the foundation of Alexandria. There were great numbers of dead. In ancient Alexandria, there were at least 500,000 inhabitants. So we find bodies in all the layers. Simple burials were the most frequent in the Greek period. But there were also mummifications, because little by little, the Greeks who were living alongside Egyptians borrowed some of their customs.
From deep within this city of darkness, the world of ancient Alexandria is coming to light. The decoration of this necropolis mirrors the style of architecture and design of the city of the living. Even the names of the inhabitants are evident on the lintels over the tombs. The archaeologists can feel the invisible presence of the ancient inhabitants. For the Alexandrians, life and death were inseparable. People brought food and water for the dead. They left oil lamps burning for them and decorated the colorful doors of their tombs with magnificent paintings. A desert wind blows, bringing with it a fine veil of sand that covers Alexandria. It is the Kamsin, meaning 50 in Arabic, and so named because it blows 50 days a year. Just as it delayed Alexander's conquest of the ancient world, it controls the fate of modern man thousands of years later. Harry Tsalas's underwater exploration grinds to a halt.
It's a desert wind that comes from the south. The sea will be calm, but we will have no exterior visibility. Even driving a Zodiac might be dangerous, I would say.
Because of bad weather, the divers can only dive 2 months a year. But at last, the weather clears and Harry is able to resume his exploration.
As a child, I have been swimming in these waters. As a Greek Alexandrian, I have always known that there were submerged antiquities, that this was the area of the palaces, of the Ptolemies and of Cleopatra. My dream has always been to return to Alexandria and to be able to do something about these antiquities. And here I am, lucky, leading a Greek mission, underwater archaeology, and we are just working here and finding and putting together this puzzle of pieces from the past, bringing back the history of the Ptolemies and of the last of the Ptolemies, Cleopatra.
Harry Tsalas's team is conducting a survey in an unexplored zone near Cape Lokias, where ancient texts suggest Cleopatra's mausoleum and the Temple of Isis once stood. The divers have located what looks like another important find, a huge block of granite known as a pylon. Pylon is a word used by the Greeks for the specific architectural piece found in front of sacred buildings like temples or shrines. It would appear that this one stood at the entrance to the Temple of Isis. Cleopatra was considered to be the reincarnation of the goddess Isis, and it is probable that she prayed every day at this temple. Isabel Harry is interested in what Harry Tsalas's team has found and agrees that this type of pylon belongs to temples. But in this case, it looks like the bottom section of the pylon is missing. As always in archaeology, all finds are open to interpretation.
Well, I'll have to check the measurements and make the...
All the cavity out.
The cavities, you mean this?
Yes.
Yeah. So you believe it was actually wider or taller?
What Harry Tsalas hopes to find is the key that will prove that this pylon stood before the Temple of Isis. The only solution is to raise the pylon and see if there is an inscription on the side hidden in the sand. At last, the weather conditions are stable. The young Greek team prepares for the salvage operation.
We're heading to a difficult operation. We have to move the leg of a monolithic pylon of granite that has been lying there for nearly 2,000 years, I believe. And we know that this pylon was in front of a sanctuary, and we know that there was only one sanctuary there, the sanctuary, the temple of Isis Lochias. So it's an historical moment.
The team has been preparing for this moment for months. Today is the day when everything comes together. After double-checking a few last details, The divers go to take their positions. Now this dangerous salvage and towing operation gets underway. The pylon weighs many tons, and the slightest error can be fatal. The divers first need to bind the straps around the pylon. After that, air balloons will be inflated, and their buoyancy will lift the nearly 10 tons of granite.
What's going to happen is they're going to pump air down to the balloon, and the thing is going to come up. And it's going to be quite impressive. It's going to be very nice.
Finally, as if roused from a deep slumber, the ancient granite pylon awakens to a new life in the 21st century. The air balloon gently lifts it from its sandy grave, and this great block of stone sets off on its last journey. Before the perplexed gaze of Egyptian fishermen, the pylon from Cleopatra's lost city is carefully towed back to the port of Alexandria.
This is a piece of testimony that eventually we are dealing with an architectural element of Alexandria. We are touching history. This piece is probably the only piece we have up to now directly related with Cleopatra.
The pylon is lovingly lifted out onto the dock. It's an emotional moment for Harry and his team, as the pylon is finally released from its watery home and positioned upright, standing again as majestically as it once did at the entrance to the Temple of Isis.
And on the top, you see also how it was put together. It's a good cleaning. There is nothing behind. There is no inscription. It was expected.
To Harry's disappointment, there is no inscription on the pylon. But the similarities between this piece and those at the entrance of the Temple of Philae give scientists enough information for us to reconstruct Cleopatra's Temple of Isis. Through a mysterious series of coincidences, a unique papyrus written by Cleopatra has just been discovered. It bears her royal command, Ginesto, make it happen.
What makes this papyrus especially interesting is that it's not a copy of a royal ordinance, but an original. It is dated to the 19th year of Cleopatra, which gives us the date 33 BC. This papyrus contains a royal ordinance from Cleopatra in which she grants extensive privileges to a Roman, Publius Canidius. He is sort of the second in command of Mark Antony's army. Before the discovery of the papyrus, we knew that Publius Canidius was involved in the preparations of the Battle of Actium, that at the time Cleopatra wanted to join the battle. Mark Antony was supposedly opposed to the idea, but Canidius talked him into it, that he would accept Cleopatra's presence at the battle, at the sea battle of Actium. Now, Cleopatra here doesn't give cash to Publius Canidius. She gives him privileges, which add up to a whole lot of money, but Canidius will have to do something for it. So it's also sort of a clever trick on the part of Cleopatra.
We are here where once stood an immense temple, the biggest of the temples of Alexandria, that was built by Cleopatra and called the Caesareum. Where exactly I'm standing, there was the sea, there was the eastern ports that included the royal port of Cleopatra, and behind stood that immense temple. It is one of the few monuments. We know exactly where the position was because until the 1870s, there were two obelisks that stood in front of that temple. Now, these obelisks were called during all the medieval time the needles of Cleopatra, les aiguilles de Cléopâtre.
Cleopatra was the most powerful woman in the antique world, and with her lover, Mark Antony, they represented a formidable couple. A cunning politician, she had first aligned her fate with Rome by marrying Caesar and bearing his child. After Caesar's assassination, she became the lover of Mark Antony, one of the three most powerful men of the empire. Cleopatra had built an extraordinary temple in honor of Julius Caesar, the Caesareum, of which traces still remain. But little did she realize that Rome was to be her downfall. Mark Antony's rival Octavian stirred up the population against this exotic foreign woman, and it was just a matter of time before a large army was dispatched to control her and her empire. At the Battle of Actium, her troops and the Roman soldiers loyal to Antony suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Octavian. Cleopatra rushed back to Alexandria and awaited the return of Antony from the battlefield. But the winds of fate worked in mysterious and tragic ways. Octavian's spies murdered her son and offered her a deal. Abdicate, betray Antony, and ally yourself with Octavian. Cleopatra refused and locked herself in her mausoleum. Word reached Antony that she had committed suicide, and he decided to join her in death. When Cleopatra heard this, she had no options left. Her son had been murdered, she had lost her empire, and Antony, the man she loved, was dead. She decided to follow the only course of action remaining, to take her own life. The death of Cleopatra marked the end of Hellenic Egypt, but it gave place to what was to become the next important power in the world, the Roman Empire.